you can. So the topic today is, I would say, interesting and relevant to any time, especially this modern time. I want to bring to your attention what had happened in the last 3 months with the COVID crisis. And suddenly, our life that went on for a while with some perception of stability suddenly was thrown into chaos. Right? We're hit with this realization that a lot of us realize that death is pretty much on our heels. It's been spread out throughout the news. It's in every community all around the world. It changes your life. It forces you to stay home. It forces you to change your habitual patterns. It's very relevant. And with this realization of the fragility of life, and that death is always on our heels, has always been. But we just not haven't been paying attention. We have this feeling of that we are somehow immune from this situation. Now that is always a present. The constant changing, the constant realization that death is ever present. So what this is called, when you realize this, and then what human beings used to do before is, well, we'll grab onto something to hold on to, so we'll reassure ourselves, right? So the answer to that is religion. I'll grab onto this and hold on to it and say, well, there's a good afterlife that after I die, I'll go to heaven, and I'll live in the land. For many native Indians, I'll live in the land of the ancestors of the dead. And I'll just keep continuing on. For the Hindus, was reincarnations. For the Christians and the monasteries of religion is some land that God created that you go to, and there shall be judged, and there's a heaven that you can go to. So in order to combat this this existential dread that is always on our heels, we come up with this idea. Well, in the 19th century, something interesting happened. It's post-enlightenment, and all these philosophers and the startup of science, we come to this realization that, oh my God, maybe that's not the case. Especially with Darwin, who was really throwing everything into chaos, right? Life is just a series of constant struggle to survive, and then you die. That's a horrible way of looking at, right? So in the 19th century, there was a crisis of faith in the Western civilizations, because they realized that the world is not as simple as it seems. All their belief was thrown into chaos and questioning. So the old ideals, promise of life after death, it becomes shaky. So Schopenhauer, kind of looked at Buddhism for a little bit. He read a little bit, and he decided that happiness, life swings like this pendulum, backward and forwards between pain and boredom. That's an exact quote from Schopenhauer. and so he looked at it and he said, happiness consists of the frequent repetition of pleasure. Well, what do? You eat your first cheesecake, and then the second cheesecake is no longer pleasurable. Second bite, right? You've got a dilemma, right? So Schopenhauer hasn't had really big answers to this dilemma. He looks at it and he says, well, life is constant striving. Life is will. This constant striving, this constant willfulness, struggle. So from that, Nietzsche built upon his understanding of Schopenhauer and his however limited understanding of Buddhism. He looked at it and he says, well, you know what? It's nihilism. So far, we realized that there's no real promise of this heaven or life after death or everything. We have this existential crisis of meaning. And nihilism appears at that point, not at the displeasure of existence. It has become greater than before, but because one has come to mistrust any meaning in suffering. So before we get a promise that, by the church, you're suffering, and throughout the world is like this, even in India and Hinduism. If you're suffering for a while, there's this promise of you'll be reborn in a better place. Sounds familiar? We still have that. Right? So suffering is justified because if you suffer as the good, then you will, reap the reward after. So the life of suffering is justified with some meaning, but suddenly in the 19th century, this is no more. They realized that we've made all this up. Because nobody has came back from the dead and told us that there was something beyond life. That there was this promised thing, right? So what happened? We've got this question of existence. What the hell is it for if we're struggling to, from one damn thing after another without any real promise after, right? So what is nihilism started, and what is nihilism? Well, nihilism is the realization that all your beliefs, all your ideas, all your values, you've made it all up. There's no inherent, objective, intrinsic meaning in any of it. So basically, Nietzsche came up with this explanation. His quote is, insofar as the world of knowledge has any meaning, the world is knowable, but it is interpretable otherwise. It has no meaning behind it, but countless meaning of perspectives. So it is our need to interpret the world, our drives and for and against, and every drive is a kind of lust to rule, and each one has its perspective that it would compelled to conquer all the other drives accepted as a norm. So we realize that all of our values, all of our belief, all of our faith is one competing ideas, perspective, one way of looking at things and trying to make meaning and interpreting the world, and fighting over it for one to trump the other. But for Nietzsche's point of view, we made it all up. None of this ever existed. Okay, because our perspective is merely that, a label we put it on what life is, right? So he concludes that a nihilist man is one who judges the world as it is not to be, ought to be, and of the world ought to be that does not exist. According to his view, our existence, action, suffering, willing, feeling, has no meaning. The pathos of in vain is the nihilist, right? So basically, if you start to look into the face of death, you realize, maybe we become nothing. Maybe life was nothing. And we don't get to see this often. Maybe once in a while we attend a funeral. Our family passed away, COVID lockdown. So what is this about? How do we go about dealing with this? And the solution with this is for Nietzsche is nihilism represents the ultimate logical conclusion to our greatest values and ideals, because we must experience nihilism before we can find out what values and these values really had. So we sometimes require new values. So he's saying with the collapse and the realization that all of the old values that was given to us was merely made up and convinced by somebody, right? The competing perspectives to one to trump another. And they're merely subjective and they're merely made up. So life has no inherent values or meaning in them. We've made it all up. And so we educate each other and we convinced each other that it's somewhere, you know, as our different versions of truth. Well, what is Nietzsche's idea to combat this? He says, well, throw it all out. The old values that you were indoctrinated, the society's values that was given to you. And what you do is you create your own values, right? Because he looks at it and he says that existence is, you know, beyond good and evil, without goal, unless the joy of the circle, his version of samsara, is itself a goal, without will, unless, you know, it rings and feels good towards itself. Do you want a name for this world? A solution for all of it? Riddles, a light for you too, best concealed, strongest motivation, intrepid, most midnightly men, you know. And this world is the will to power, nothing besides. And you yourself are all this will to power and nothing besides. Well, what he's saying is, you know, this world is constantly coming into being and going out of being. You know, he's reading Buddhism. So he agrees with Buddhism. This world is constantly coming to being and going out of being. This world is striving, is a constant force of striving that brings things from nothing into existence. And so we've got this circle, right? Which itself has no inherent meaning. It just happens, right? So how do you deal with this? Well, when you know that all the meanings are made up and there isn't inherently any meaning in it, what are you going to do? What are you going to do? Right? And Kierkegaard, before Nietzsche, says, well, don't kill yourself. One solution is don't kill yourself, because there's inherently no meaning there. You know, life is empty without existence. It's just really depressing, right? And when you look into this, it can be very depressing. And so Nietzsche says, you know what? Don't kill yourself. However, you know, uncomfortable and not fun in all of this, that we're suffering for nothing, which kind of sucks because there's no promise in the next world. So why don't you just choose your meaning? Make yourself happy. Strive to create from the ashes of the world's values collapsing, right? Reinvent yourself with with a new willing of your own values. So he didn't specify, you know, and this type of person, he calls them the overman, but he didn't specify what new values are this overman's going to create. He just says that these values are not going to be the kind that was followed by the established value system. So he's pretty rebellious. So he says, you know, you're going to go and create your own values. You're going to go create your own, you know, false existence, even though you know it's not, there's inherently no meaning in it. Sounds familiar? It's exactly our world in the 21st century. We've got a crisis of meaning everywhere. We've got, you know, religions falling, and we've got the rise of atheism, and everybody's trying to create their own meaning. All the old institutions are failing. And so, you know, thanks to this, we've got a new form of religion, you know, in philosophy, communism, Karl Marx, capitalism. We are creating our own new values, right? And for Nietzsche, he looks at this and he goes, well, it's flexible, it's multiple perspective. This new enlightened overman. Okay, he didn't use the word enlightened, but he looked at it and he says, well, you know, this type of man is has creates his own will. He has absolute freedom of the will to power to do anything that he pleases. You know, his imposing his individual perspective onto the world and the recognition that there are countless perspectives and all deserving of equal attention and respect, and yet he stands apart from the established value of his own independent man. Wow, that sounds really nice. Who doesn't want that, right? Ooh, it's really nice to your ego. That's exactly how you start your suffering, isn't it? When somebody tells you, you're really special. Okay, you're really special. You stand apart from the crowd. You're gonna throw away all the established stuff, and you're gonna cut your swath in the world, and you know, kind of establishes yourself as the independent person in the world, free from all of that falsehood. Of course, you only know that it's falsehood because you realize that life inherently has no meaning, and you just create them. So you're going to go on and create your own meaning. Huh? And that's Nietzsche's answer, you know, to the dilemma of nihilism, of having no meaning in life. Well, what does Buddhism have to say about this? Oh dear. You probably know. That is you are actually taking, you know, one dream that was given to you by society, that's constructed, you know, society construct to you, and then you're going to break that down, and then you're going to build a dream. That's exactly what it is, right? So the will to power is a call to suffering. Maybe sometimes, you know, going with society is not so bad. At least you kind of feel safe that, you know, and believe that, yes, you die and you go into the next world and you have a good rebirth. And so, you know, you kind of have an opiate to you know, tell yourself that all will be okay. And, you know, every night you go and you pray and, and at least you feel comforted, right? But the will to power, you've got none of that. You realize that this value, all these beliefs, all these perspectives, you created yourself. So you don't have that comfort anymore, right? Or that belief. Even if you hold heartedly to your belief, you realize that, you know, upon creating that belief, that is that belief itself, that perspective, that will to power, it was all created by you. And it has no inherent truth in it. Okay? So is that a solution? Okay, that's not a good solution, right? So for Buddhism, this will to power is nothing but thirst. It's called Hanha, right? Which is what causes samsara. Is the movement of desire. It's just like the tree desire, you know, to reach out its branch towards the sun, to grow, to survive. A human being desire to continue existence in life itself in so many different ways. We try to create our reality. We try to, you know, create our physical reality. We try to create our psychological reality. And all of this striving, all of these these wantings, okay? It's, for Buddhism, is what? Suffering. So, Nietzsche, brilliant guy, okay? except that his answer is exactly the dilemma that we're in right now in the 21st century. It's exactly what our society is going through. You know, we're striving, we're creating, we're redefining at breakneck pace what the reality is. What's the, you know, we continually throw out the old and we create the new. To the point where science becomes the new religion that changes its gospel all the time. So There's so much uncertainty. Matter of fact, the belief that life is the only thing that is real, it's uncertainty. But then we don't really have the answers for it. So how does Buddhism deal with this? How does Zen deal with this? Oh, sorry, wrong button. um, so how does Zen deal with this? Then we don't, we look at all these impermanence, all this, coming to being and going out of being, and we're saying, don't be in that. if you're continually in that, that's the only that just causes suffering. So why don't you just get out of the dream of becoming? Huh? So get out of the dream of becoming. Huh? It's not nihilism, because nihilism comes pretty close. Nihilism is the collapse of all belief, and you realize, oh shit, I'm lost in life. I'm nowhere. Right? Reality is, I'm suffering. History of human beings is one damn thing after another. and life is suffering, and there's no inherent meaning in any of the suffering. That's nihilism. And what do you do with that? Well, the Buddhist response to that is what? Come on, any of you? John?
The Buddhist response to the Buddhist response to nihilism, is that what you're?
Yes. The inherent meaninglessness of life and suffering of life.
I guess it's, once you get to the point of the nihilist, that's when you're kind of in the realm of Buddha nature and nirvana, right?
No, because in the realm of the nihilist, we're still dealing with the lack of meaninglessness, right? And inherent suffering. So the suffering's still there.
Yeah.
So how is the Buddhist respond to it?
Just notice it and live in the now, and let things come and go.
Yes. So our response to it is a detachment from it all. Huh? The absolute acceptance of the state of reality as it is, and completely detachment of all to all of this. Not to identify with it and accept it, and at the same time detach with it. So you live a life that is full with the acceptance of what is, and at the same time you're free from all of this suffering. Why? Because dualism, when you've let go of all these dualistic, concerns, we are free to act from whatever that arises, and because we're no longer self-obsessed in our own suffering with our own dualistic concerns, we're capable of seeing other people. Right? And when we're capable of seeing other people, something happened. It's called bodhicitta. It's a not, I call it a striving of non-striving. Where love flows without agenda. Okay, so in Buddhism, the response to this is, don't let the will come up again, make it collapse. Stay with it, and realize the emptiness, right? And realize that the dualistic, play that we create life is just that, a play in suffering. So stop becoming. Don't become anything. Be whatever that is here, right? You know, it sounds weird, but there's a freedom in that, because when you're no longer tied to an idea, you're no longer tied to a particular perspective, it frees you to be whatever, right? It frees you completely. Of course, Nietzsche and Schopenhauer didn't understand this, because I guess in the 19th century, they don't have enough Buddhist translation. So, no wonder we see a surge of interest in Buddhism and Zen in the West. Why? Because this is something that is naturally follows the path that was set out since the 19th century. Nietzsche predicted exactly the world that happened afterwards, with the collapse of all the beliefs, the values of the church, you know, in Europe, and the reemergence of, you know, the strong man, you know, Karl Marx and Hitler's and all these people with all these beliefs that it's almost like a new religion. And then our new religion today is what? It's kind of a sucky religion, right? It's a religion of consumerism. It's a religion of continuously working to consume, and then we work and then we consume. It's a religion that is entirely soulless. Okay? And this is the dilemma that we find ourselves in. That's why this is what Nietzsche predicted 100 years ago. So when he said, God is dead and we have killed him, he didn't actually mean it as a good thing. He didn't celebrate. He says, God is dead, it's great, bring the science in. No, he said, God is dead and we have killed him, and we should mourn for it, right? Because the vacuum, the void that is created will be filled with, he hoped, would be filled with the overman, you know, who would not, who see falseness for what it is, right? Who see all these belief systems, all these ideals, all these values that we created. These all are created, you know, and none of them has any absolute truth or inherently value in them. But the problem is Nietzsche's overman, the guy who comes out and creates new values for himself, is independent of the crowd. Well, what happens if you get a couple of million or 100 million people who wants to be this overman? Aaron's laughing because life becomes really chaotic, isn't it? Because everybody wants to be special. Everybody wants to stand out from the crowd. None of us want to be ordinary. Huh? So the answer to you know, with Zen is, well, you're gonna have to be ordinary, because the truth is life is ordinary, and ordinariness means that whatever happening in this moment, there's nothing there. It's what happening. And we don't have to put any label or meaning onto it. We can still see what is happening, and we don't have to suffer with it because we add meaning to it. We just continue our suffering. Huh? Right? Because if the meaning doesn't match with whatever is happening, that's called suffering. Okay. Millen, welcome back to join us. You want to unmute and join the discussion?
Yeah, sure.
So
I didn't catch a lot of that because my connection's very slow. So
that's fine. So the Bodhisattva is you know, the Buddhist answer, the Buddhism's answer. The Bodhisattva is the Buddhism's answer to this inherent chaos that is created and it predicted since the 19th century from Nietzsche. till now, which is very much relevant in our world. The lack of meaninglessness. I mean, the meaninglessness of it all, and everyone trying to create their own meaning, knowing that it's false, by the way. And you know, what happens is that we're all willing to create a meaning, to create reality, to manifest whatever we think or we want life to be, interpret life to be. And then we realize that we're all suffering because life doesn't go according to our meaning. It's never congruent. Right? What we want and what life is it's a mismatch, right?
It's two different things.
That's right. And the answer, the Buddhist answer, is the Bodhisattva, not the Oberman of Nietzsche, where, you know, one wills themselves against the masses and creates one's own meaning out of the ashes of, albeit, you know, the establishment values. And he's coming close. He says, you know, and this thing is beyond good and evil. That's fine, except that you know, whatever meaning you create on it itself in its inherent value has a good or a bad based on what you like, right? So if the cheesecake is, you know, it's nice and tasty, it's good, right? But if you got lactose tolerance like Stacy, oh, it's really bad. So these are all perspective. These are all relative. None of them it has any relevance, you know, to reality. And so the Bodhisattva no longer seeks to create this. No longer seeks. The Bodhisattva is the being who is completely in touch with reality. Accept completely what reality is, applies no meanings or interpretations to them. Right? So therefore, he is not in, you know, discongruence, you know, with reality. Why? Because you impose a label, a meaning onto reality. Sometimes it's going to be, you know, not matching, right? Because it's something that came out of your head, right? Oh, I'm suffering. I don't like that I feel this pain. Too bad, you're feeling it. Right? So why don't you just give that up and say, I'm gonna accept that it's happening. Does that make any sense? So the Bodhisattva is one who is completely free. Why is this person free? It's because this person is no longer imposing his will or whatever will of meaning onto reality as it unfolds, and live in accordance with reality, with whatever is taking place. And I don't mean living in accordance is somebody's beating you, you're going to accept it and sit there. Living in accordance sometimes is you run. Right? Because that's in line with reality. But you don't need to think about it, you just run. Does that make sense? Right. So the Bodhisattva is completely immersed in the present, in touch with reality, in touch with what is, without imposing any will, any perspective, any desire upon the present moment. That is the Buddhist and the Zen answer to the dilemma of the existential kind of, you know, dilemma that we have.
I was going to give the kindergarten version of the Bodhisattva as opposed to the educated, whatchamacallit version.
Well, you know, I've been giving the kindergarten version for 10 years, and sometimes people don't think that I'm a nerd, but I just kind of let the inner nerdiness comes out, so let you know.
Well, it really came about because of a question some people had asked. And it was a question that Kathy asked a few weeks ago. She
Yeah.
asked a question about feeling very helpless with
Mhm.
the Black Lives Matter and all these kind of things going on, and about what you can do or what you should do or what's possible.
Mhm.
And realistically, I think I answered it at the time, but you can only do what you can.
What's in front of you?
Because if you're constrained by COVID because you can't travel down to the States or whatever it is to demonstrate, or you can't go to the legislature because of keeping social distancing and everything. But sort of going back to the Bodhisattva thing, somebody else asked as well, the Bodhisattva path and the vows and everything. Well, the Bodhisattva vows, I think I took 48 vows. I think Megan took 10, or just she increased her vows from 5 to 10. And I expect there's probably more than 48 vows for the Bodhisattva. But in terms of being able to progress your practice, or being able to sort of understand what the basis of the Bodhisattva vows is, it's more a case of understanding how you interpret it on a day-to-day basis. How do you do the Bodhisattva vows?
And
And
the
really,
answer to the Bodhisattva vow is there's only one vow.
yes. And you want to tell them, or shall I tell them?
You tell them. You know.
Well, you might say I'm wrong then.
Whatever.
So realistically, what is the Bodhisattva vow? It's about how you behave, how you interact with people, how you interact with what's outside of you. If you bear in mind that what's outside you is just you, whether it's a person or a situation or whatever, and you let that guide you, then that's what you do. That's what the Bodhisattva vow is about doing what you can, behaving in a way as you would behave to yourself. So the Christian thing talks about do unto others as you'd want them to do unto you. Well, there's the Bodhisattva vow in all its complexity, in just one simple sentence. So there was a question last week, I think, from Joseph about how much to donate to the Sangha. Well, if you were having to donate to yourself or a close relative, how much would you give them? You'd give them enough. It's as simple as that. Give them enough. Whatever you're comfortable with, give them enough. You can't expect, in terms of, say, for example, going back to the Kathy dilemma of being a Gandhi or something like that. But what did he see? He saw people around him being mistreated. He wouldn't want to see that mistreatment being carried on. So what did he do? He rebelled against it. He did what he could. Did he set out when he first started to demonstrate or do all these things and think to himself, you know what, I'll do this, I'll become famous? More than likely not. He just did it because he saw the condition of the people, or saw the conditions that the people around him were living. And he said, there's something that I need to do about this. And it was in the doing that the fame and everything came along, that all those things came along. Those were, in essence, side benefits. They were side plates. But the main dish was to try and improve the conditions of his fellow man, because he didn't agree with the way that they were having to live.
Yeah, well, the main dish is in the doing itself.
Yes. So
the main dish is in the doing itself. So the Bodhisattva only has one vow, to be in touch with reality as it unfolds.
Yeah, that's right. So you only do what you can. You're not expected to do more, because that's just an expectation. It's just something that you think that you might have.
Well, it's value you're imposing on reality, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. So
I like to give it a nerdy version, but that's easier to understand, right?
So in terms of that question, in terms of the Bodhisattva vows or how you behave in life and things like that, it's very simple. Do what you can in terms of the reality that's in front of you, and do it as if you were doing it to yourself. So if you wouldn't shout at yourself, then don't shout at anybody else. If you can't bear to see somebody who's poor or a beggar in front of you, and you feel that you ought to give them something, but it doesn't mean you have to give everything. Give them enough. Do enough. That's what it's about.
And you know that bodhisattva vow is also about being in touch. The first thing is about being in touch with reality. And that reality includes your inner reality. It's not just the people outside. Matter of fact, the inner reality is more important, right? And that's the first thing about the bodhisattva vows, is to be in touch with reality as it unfolds, as is, right? So, yes. Question?
Yeah, I was just gonna comment that you have to learn what you need first, like based on what Millen's saying, because I personally don't treat myself well, so like that doesn't quite work for me. Like I have to learn what I need before I know what others need, if that makes sense.
Well, that's being in touch with reality. You're seeing that you're drained, right? Whatever reality is unfolding, the reality that's unfolding is I'm not treating myself well. I'm drained.
Yeah.
But your bodhisattva vows is to be with that reality, to work with that reality first.
Yeah, you have to see that first. Yeah.
Right. It's not some idea that you're going into the future, you know, some greatness, you know, that you're going to will yourself into, you know, according to Nietzsche, you're going to will yourself into be the savior of men, or the, you know, somebody independent from the world. Well, that's just more delusion, isn't it? well, right now you hardly got any money to pay bills. and you're receiving serve, okay? Let's get in touch with reality. Okay? And to be honest, you know, sometimes it's really deflating for the ego to be in touch with reality, because egos don't like that shit.
No, ego will always want to impose values, and going back to what Crystal was saying about treating yourself. So if you're shouting at your son, for example, if you take a moment, if you take a breath and think to yourself, would I be shouting at me? No. So don't shout at your son. It's so simple, right? Just that moment of reflection. That's all it needs. That moment of reflection to see how you behave. How you want to be treated.
The funny thing is, to save all living beings, you gotta save yourself first. If you're beating yourself over the head for making mistakes, oh my God, that's not a bodhisattva thing to do.
Well, you'll end up beating everybody else for mistakes too, right?
Exactly. So you know, the bodhisattva vows, it's all of this, people. It's just being in touch with reality and working with what you got. Huh?
So hopefully that's answered some of those questions about the bodhisattva vows.
And for all those nerds that love philosophy, I'm going to end it up with this quote from Schopenhauer. When we read, another person thinks for us. We're merely repeating his mental process. In learning to write, the pupil goes over with his pen what the teacher has outlined in pencil. So in reading, the greater part of the work of thought is already done for us. This is why it relieves us to take up on books after being occupied with our own thoughts. And in reading, the mind is, in fact, the only playground of another's thought. So it comes about that if anyone spends almost the whole day in reading, and by way of relaxation, devotes the interval to some thoughtless pastime, he gradually loses the capacity for thinking, just as the man who always rides at last forgets how to walk. This is the case with many learned people. They have read themselves stupid. So, remember, I've spent over 10 years studying philosophy, Eastern philosophy, religions, and Western, you know, some Western philosophy along the way. I've realized that I've read myself stupid. So, you know, if you want to practice that, if you want to really understand the truth, you got to figure it out. yourself. Don't read other people's work. Don't listen to other people's talks. Uh, you got to take up the torch and sit on your cushion, and embark on that journey yourself. I really like Schopenhauer because he's kind of, a nice guy to Buddhism. He says a man can be himself only for so long as he is alone, and if he does not love solitude, he will not love freedom. For it is only when he is alone that he is really free. Okay, so what do we do in our Zen practice? We continually try to strive and practice and live in solitude each day, right? Getting on our cushion.